Hey everybody, this is Dan Pittman with DRB Systems, and today I've got Jason Baumgartner from SUD sitting in Boise, Idaho, and I have got Chris Moriarty, the master of mustache, from the state of Washington. And where exactly are you, Chris, today?
I'm up in the San Juan Islands it's Fidalgo Island, but the town's actually Anacortes, where
Fantastic.
this is the dress code now.
All
It's your
right.
Corona comb, is what we call it right there.
So, so we want to talk about this is the first in a series that we call DataBytes, and it's really around the concept of data is powerful, and it's the new oil, if you will, and a lot of folks have been working with us to help educate us about the market. And Jason and Chris and the team at SUDS have been doing a lot to help car wash operators harness their data, and that's what we're going to be about today. But today's going to be a focus on what's going on in our country and what's going on in the news in regards to Corona. And today's really the first session. It's a baseline. It's a baseline that we'll build on every week. And as we track what's going on in our industry as it goes through this very interesting time here in our country. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to let Chris, you introduce yourself, and then Jason, and just give us 30 seconds and I'll do it. And then we're going to jump right into the data, guys. So Chris, who are you?
Yeah, so I'm Chris Moriarty again, Vice President of Consumer Strategy for SUDS and DRB. And in a nutshell, we look for patterns all day. And why I'm really looking forward to today's conversation is my world is data and it is patterns. And there's a lot to be learned from the numbers and from the trends that are going on. Whether it's good news or bad news, it's always better to be prepared, because that fear of the unknown is, I think, what's crushing people right now. And I think we're going to shed some light on a lot of great topics today.
Very good. Give us a little about your education and some of the spaces you played in the data world, Chris.
Oh, absolutely. So I've been helping businesses grow their revenues for over 15 years in a variety of different industries. I got my MBA at the University of Illinois. I've got a master's degree in behavioral economics from the University of Northern Iowa, another degree from Iowa. I'm still enrolled in an MSA program, and I'm a lifelong learner. So I authored a book last year, and it's just, there's so much happening so quickly these days that I've had the good fortune of being able to be a perpetual student. And what I learn and the new tactics that I bring back is to help business owners just gain clarity on what they're trying to do, how they hit their goals. And I've just been really, really thankful and really, really blessed that I've been able to kind of sit in this seat.
All right. Jason, tell us about yourself.
Well, I've been in the marketing and marketing research field since 2004. Started a marketing agency, digital marketing agency in 2011 called Brainstorm Creative. And one of our clients that we picked up about 3 years in was a car wash company called Epic Shine. And we loved the industry. We had some really disruptive, unique ideas, and had some success with our first go at it, and decided to jump straight into the industry. We created a company. My business partner, Chase Wilson, and I created SUDS Creative, and back in 2016. And now we're in 46 different states, about 500 locations that we actively manage. So our purpose is, we're a marketing company, but really our purpose statement is we create strategies to maximize client revenue. And part of that, or much of that, is really understanding the present and understanding how to react to the present, and using data to inform strategy decisions to create extra revenue, additional revenue, and bottom line revenue for our clients.
Very good. And I've got to know both these guys. They love car wash operators in the car wash industry. I'm Dan Pittman with DRB Systems. I've been in the industry 5 years. I come from, before this, I was in agriculture, I was in steel, I was in technology and banking, and also the sciences space. And I tell you what, this is a place, the purpose statement of DRB, or brand promise, if you will, really reflects the fact that we love car washing as much as car washers do. And we are passionate about empowering car wash operators to kind of go out and get that American dream happening. It's really neat. As we had our Data to Dollar Summit, it was so cool to look out across the audience and see the American dream all over that room. It was inspiring. So we know this is a hard time for those folks and some of the folks that are going through this. So let's jump into the data and see what's happening. I'm going to share my screen, do my very best to impersonate somebody who runs a technology company. And so as we jump into the DataBytes with DRB, I'm going to use this view because it works better for us. And what we're going to talk about first is what's going in car washing. First, I want to clarify data for everybody. This data is anonymized, and it is not all car washes that we work with, but it is a fair amount. It's a random sample of about 3,000 car washes, so it's a very safe number. We're not going to represent or reveal anything about anybody. It's really just about high-level transactions. We have a very, think of it as there's a data point, there's a one, and there's a state that goes with it, and allows us to count by state and then total up by country. I want to be very, very careful. We've been very, very accountable with this data. But, Jason and Chris, when we look at the data, car washes year over year, 20 versus 19, there's kind of a really clear following pattern in the last 3 weeks, the charts by weeks, and you certainly see weeks 12 and 13, which would be last week. Week 13 of this year was last week, and it compares to the week from 2019. It looks like we're down about, call it 40,000 car washes. But Jason, I know you've been looking at data for a long time. What's your take on what this chart really tells us?
Well, what it says week over week or year over year for that particular week is that we're down about 50%. So 97,000 cars in 2019, 49,000 cars on average for that week in 2020. The difference, though, the piece of it that's not on this is weather. So in week 13 of 2019, weather obviously has a dramatic impact on car wash volume. In 2019, there was inclement weather in many major markets and several regions, large regions across the United States. So that number actually should be going up if it was a typical weather week. You're entering into pollen season. The weather's starting to get nice, on the West Coast, and you're going to see car counts start to increase. Pollen season across the East Coast and in the Southeast. So that number should be ticking up. So that is a little bit misleading. That 50% number is probably more like 75% down as opposed to 50% down if it was an average week. And we'll know a lot more when we get the week 14 data plugged in as well.
That's one thing that we're learning. We'll know when we get to week 14 and then 15. I mean, we're learning so much every week. I want to take everybody's attention to another chart here that is the same time frame, but it's really around credit card transaction. Again, this is anonymized. This is a random sample of data that we look at, but it's the same over every week. And one of the things, my goodness, one of the things that you notice is you see the recharges for the recurring. There's actually a lot of charges happening just to recharge. But one of the things you pointed out to me, Jason, is the weekend peaks are gone. And as we go through, so I think all this does is it validates it. And I think, again, tune in at the next episode, everybody, because in a week from now, we're going to have information on what that peak data looks like at the beginning of the month. And to Jason's point, we'll have that 14 week 14 data, and we'll be able to do some things with that. But in general, when you average the whole country, this is kind of what it looks like on aggregate or on average. Jason, you always warn me about averages. So talk to me about what's going on like inside these big, huge numbers around the country.
Well, from region to region, it's a little bit different. It depends on, how quickly your state shut down, if your state shut down. We are starting to see states that shut down early or large metro areas that shut down early. Car washes shut down at that time, and now some of those are starting to reopen. Sometimes to members only, sometimes with limiting cash transactions, not having people use the vacuums. There's some backlash. There can be some backlash. So we've kind of pivoted into more of a public relations kind of stance with a lot of our clients right now. But again, it varies from state to state. So some of the states that were hit really hard early on, California, Washington, even places like Chicago that were shut down, some of those stores are starting to open up a little bit sooner or in selected areas across the state. And there's really, you're looking at California, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Washington. These are some of the states that shut down early. And so you're seeing this really, really steep decline. I think those numbers toward the middle of this week that we're currently in, you'll start to see those numbers creep up just a little bit from where they were last week, because some of those locations are starting to open again. And albeit limited opens, limiting vacuums or no vacuums or members only.
Yeah, we've seen at the home office for DRB, we've seen a lot of folks opening back up. We saw folks that were adjusting arm plans for their customers, and then they're reversing some of those things. Actually, we're seeing a little bit of a trend there. And a lot of folks that shut down are opening back up because they can wash for emergency vehicles, so that gives them the ability to stay open. Some people are doing some sanitizing, I'm sorry, at their site as well. And then just some states in general recognize it makes sense to let folks wash car, but not, if this is the scarier graphs, talk about other areas, Jason. I'll flip the screen here that kind of have maybe might surprise people a little bit.
Sure. I mean, states like Florida, New Mexico, Tennessee, Georgia, Maine, these are states that were laggards in terms of their response. Necessarily, they didn't have as deep a response or as deep of an impact from COVID-19 earlier on. So in the previous slide, we were able to show, the impact that was happening when you do shut down a state. Not to say that that there won't be an impact in these states, but so far there hasn't been, because there hasn't been a blanket. The governor hasn't shut down the state of Florida, or hadn't. And so really, you look at those numbers, they're neck and neck with where they were in 2019. Same with New Mexico. Georgia, you can see that dip in Georgia, a week of bad weather. That could be, 2019 showing a week of bad weather, and then you're starting to see a drop off in Georgia. So they actually look like they're in line, but one could be weather related, one could be COVID-19 related. And then the same thing with Maine and Tennessee. So there are definitely regions and states across the country that have not been as impacted from COVID-19, albeit I wouldn't say that will be the case forever. It just is the case right now. And so depending on the severity of the infection with the COVID-19 in the state and the response by those local municipalities and state governments, you could see these start to trail off. Just depends on what happens with COVID-19, which is what Chris is going to talk about a little bit later.
What a great segue into talking about COVID-19, and it's kind of where you can directly correlate. First of all, a little bit of my introduction of Chris. I was the guy that in college took master's level statistics courses for electives. I like math, but Chris is off the chart. He makes math. He's the most math interesting guy on the face of the earth. He used to be the guy in the commercial, actually, the most interesting guy. But anyways, he's going to walk us through kind of a look at data and how it can be used to kind of see how it's affecting different parts of the country. So I don't know if you wanted to do entire U.S. or Northeast. Where do you want to start, Chris? I'll put the right screen on.
We'll start right here, which is just looking at the whole country. So one of the things that Jason and I like to remind folks is that as much as we're interested in data, ultimately we're interested in people and ultimately their behaviors. So it was funny. I don't know if you guys see, since we're all watching a lot of Netflix these days, the show Ozarks came out with their third season. And in like the very first episode, they referenced what's called the law of large numbers. And I think I was one of the few people in the country going, I use that every day. Because when it comes down to individuals, you never know what somebody's going to do. But because of where we sit, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of data points that we can look at. And when you get that many together, you start seeing a flow, kind of like a murmur of birds, if you've ever seen that. So what we wanted to do was say, okay, so looking at the active cases in every given state, what's the relationship, what's the correlation, we would call that, between the number of cases and the average car count for that week. And what we found, and don't get too lost in some of the stuff on the screen, but basically what it all boiled down to was about a 6% impact, meaning the amount of cases in your state to the degree of about 6% is driving your wash count or influencing your wash total to some degree. But we just talked about the fact that wash numbers were down by 50%. And that's where interpretation of the data becomes so important, because what it's telling us is that it really doesn't matter how many cases are in your state. It matters how many cases there are in all the states. Because when we look out our window, like I live in a pretty remote area, I don't see a lot of evidence of the pandemic from here. However, we're all behaving in a way as if it's right outside my front door. It's preventing my behaviors. It's preventing me from doing things regardless of where I am geographically. So the beautiful thing about this is that it is so fluid. And I like that we're starting this week with just a handful of data points, because next week we're going to add in weather. And we're going to add in more variables over time so we can really break out what's having the effect. As we've mentioned, we have several sites that have come back online within the last week, and everyone is watching how that's going to be received. Because when we think about behavior, there is so much positive social benefit from people seeing activity in their communities, especially activities that are safe, like the car wash, where you can be wholly insulated and still protected, but still go out and see people. When we start surveying, and how we've been doing this for a long time, when do people tend to wash their cars? Once people get into a pattern, it takes a lot for them to change. So the people that wash their car on the way to work would continue to do so. The people who wash their car when they run errands would continue to do so. But now all that's been disrupted. People are running errands at new times. They're not driving to or from the office anymore. So as we started looking at that credit card transaction data, one of the things that we're paying close attention to are the timestamps. When are people coming? Because it makes sense to me that people will be avoiding the traditional peak hours of Friday nights and Saturdays, because that's when more people would be there, and we don't want to be around people right now. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a flattening in terms of when people are coming to these washes. So we'll be able to see that as these weeks go on. But if you look at the graph at the bottom, what you have is, number one, a straight line. That's called a linear function. But the reality is very few things are linear in life. And where you see the curved line underneath is probably a better representation of what the math tells us could potentially happen. So what it says down there, if you can see that line, as it relates to individual cases in each state, if we hit 35,000 cases in a state, the wash volume should drop to 0. Now, as you'll notice, that line comes back up, and that big dot over on the end, that's New York. And of course, it's not at 0. And this is because we have to know what the data is. New York City, of course, has tens of thousands of cases, unfortunately, but New York State does not. New York State is still washing cars, and that's why you kind of see that rebound. Now, knowing that that's sort of that impact overall, what happens if we narrow in? We know that there is a hotbed of activity happening in the Northeast. And if you want to switch to the next slide,
There it is.
if we isolate for, I think it's like 8 states or something in here, we can see it goes from 6% up to 25%. So it's much, much more significant as it relates to those states with higher intensity, with that density of active cases. And you can see that their theoretical 0 gets pulled way up, where we were at 35, 36,000. It's right about 25,000 for those states. So it becomes more and more sensitive. So as new case information becomes available, we update this because it's fluid and it's going to move. But by tracking data this way and by layering in more variables, what we should be able to do is see around the curve a little bit, meaning that when this thing starts to turn around, we're going to be able to pick it up. We're going to be able to see things change and be able to predict the rebound before it happens. And if it does not rebound quickly, it's just as important to be prepared for that. You know, we're all eager for some good news, but being prepared for the long haul is even more important. In fact, we were talking to a site down in Florida where they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know if they're going to have to shut down. So what we were investigating was some pretty aggressive tactics to fill the coffers, even though they might be taking deals or offering deals you would never do any other time, by keeping that bank flush and sitting on a little bit of cash. Because if it goes to 0, you don't know if you're going to have to stay alive 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6, and whatever it is. But this becomes our roadmap. And again, it's a living, moving thing.
Chris,
And
let me ask you a question, or let me translate back, because I want to make sure everybody's capturing. I picked up a couple things that might be actionable. Maybe this is a chance for the 3 of us to jam offline about an opportunity for our next episode. First of all, as I look out my window, I live in a medium rural area. Jason, you're in the Boise area. Chris, he's a mountain man, just Look at him. But as we look at our individual situations, those would never stop us from going and getting our car washed. It's because we're watching the national news, and it's because we're watching things that are scary. And we are not in any way recommending anybody do anything that isn't safe or clean. But the reality is, if we could get people to ignore a national pattern and think locally, they may be more apt to go to a local car wash in their car, safe, secure. So maybe, Jason, from a marketing perspective, if we know it's a higher level, a macro pattern, if we can get people to think micro, maybe there's opportunity for marketing there. And additionally, maybe the other part of it is, Chris, you mentioned, it's so obvious that nobody's going to work. Nobody's going even grocery shop at the same time when the car washes are open. So all their car wash times have been changed. So if there's a way, in a marketing perspective, to work ourselves as car washers into the micro view of the community and associate ourselves with any new pattern we can think of. No matter, maybe if we can think of what people are still driving to, we need to latch to that somehow probably and become part. So anyways, just a thought for the audience. This is the things that we're going to be trying to apply the data to so we can bring things to you as we go through. What are your thoughts, Chris or Jason, on that?
Well, and part of it is there's such a distinct advantage to being in this industry right now. I know everybody's scared, but let's all be thankful we don't own movie theaters, because there's going to be, and I did some investigation on this yesterday, there's a lot of economists predicting which economies are going to come back and when. And when it comes to concerts, sporting events, I mean, who knows? But we know that we're going to be on the front end of whatever this rebound is. But when we think about today, there was an email that came through, I think my wife intercepted it, where in Oregon, they were changing the protocols for the way they were able to accept medical devices in terms of they were allowing half-used portions to be donated. So you get a half bottle of hand sanitizer, a half box of rubber gloves, or whatever it is. And so I started thinking about that. I'm like, well, you still have to get them there. So you're going to mail it? You're going to drive it down there to where all the sick people are? No. So I was chatting with another site who's about to open back up. And I said, I think it would behoove us to investigate becoming a drop-off point where people are on their way. They're going to be getting gas. They're going to be getting food. They want to participate in this. We want to give back to the community and shine that light on, hey, people are out there. We're alive. We're helping. The economy is still here. It might be hiding, but it's positive and it's completely safe. So just leveraging a lot of the physical capital, the sites themselves, into not only helping do some business, but help the community as an extension of that.
And you're getting people to focus locally, and they're braver locally than nationally. And you're also changing their pattern to influence a trip to the car wash. Jason, any thoughts?
Yeah, I also think that, there's something really nice about being in the industry of clean right now. So people associate clean with probably more importance than they have, maybe in their entire lives. And it's funny because, I think there's an educational component here where, hand sanitizer is alcohol and it kills bacteria, right? But the reason why they say wash your hands with soap and water is actually more effective because it kills the germs. There's something about the soap that breaks down the protein on the outside of the virus itself and exposes the protein and will kill the protein even without harming it. It dissolves that outer layer. So you think about your car door handles, you think about how much you touch those. You go to the grocery store, you come out and you grab your car, and even if you wash your hands when you get back to your house, you come back out, you grab that door handle, there's that the virus could stay there for a while. Being able to wash your car and wash everything, like every trip to the grocery store, maybe it's just once a week right now, but that's an added benefit. So there's a lot of messaging components here that we can get people thinking about the benefit of being clean, sanitary, and the soaps that are being used on the cars will have the same effect on that protein on the outside of the virus. So it will dissolve that protein on the outside of the virus and make your car door handles, for example, more sanitary. So there's a lot to play with here, and we're really excited about bringing that, for our clients.
So in the next several weeks, we'll be coming back, and as a layman, my takeaways today were around locally versus nationally, trying to impact people locally, getting people associated with pattern, and maybe there's some social good that can draw those people into those patterns. And we're a part of the clean solution. So maybe next week, before we kick off our data talk or after our data talk, we'll always baseline everything with data and what's going on, what patterns look like. Let's see what trends we can begin to predict. Chris has got some great models about predicting change and things like that. We'll be covering those things, but also we can come back and drill into some of these areas. We're going to sign off here. Just any last words, Chris or Jason?
Just again, thank everybody for even allowing us this platform to share these things. I'm really excited as we get just 1 or 2 more weeks in. The forecasting models are going to get better and better. And as much as I hated to show that even theoretical 0 point, it's important that we look at it. But the forecasting tools that we're going to be bringing to the table, I think, will be much more accurate and not nearly as gloomy or scary. There's a middle way here, and we're gonna showcase it.
Yeah, the silver lining here is, we have so many clients that are down 50% in car count, but only 20% in revenue. And the fact is that unlimited membership just decreases the amount of volatility. And when you get into a situation like this, the ability to reach out, communicate with your customers becomes of utmost importance. And those ARM customers, those unlimited customers, become so important because, again, 50% decrease in volume doesn't have to mean a 50% decrease in revenue. You could be 30% up on where you would be, and a lot of that's attributable to unlimited revenue.
Well, and I'm really excited about next week, because knowing that Chris and Jason can't get out to get their hair cut right now, it means that I probably won't even be able to. We'll see. Next week, we may not even be able to see their eyes. It'll just completely overtake it. But anyways, we want to thank everybody for joining us and spending the time with us, and we'll continue to try to find pieces of education that are practical and can move the ball forward. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.